All right, we now have the recording on. I'm going to give the recording audience a moment to look at the introductory slide here so they can catch up. I was talking about this before the recording came on, and you can always pause the recording and leave the slide at leisure if you want to. And with that, we'll go into the core of the material. So anytime we're giving a Devar Torah, we want to say something about what the Torah means, and that raises the enormous question, how do we know what the Torah means? If I'm going to get up there and say, this is what I found the Torah to mean, and I want to share this thing that I found with you, then you would like to feel some confidence that there is some basis for reading the Torah in a certain way, or perhaps not. Perhaps you're comfortable getting up there and going, unassisted, but for a variety of reasons, particularly the first few times, don't really recommend that. Having some sources to work from is a good idea. Well, first of all, the Jewish tradition makes it very clear that the Torah is a document we are not just supposed to memorize and chant, but it's a document we're supposed to explain and interpret and understand and question and challenge, because we're meant to interact with it in that way. When we make the blessing on Torah, we don't make a blessing for reading it or chanting it. We make a blessing for studying it, for la'asok, which is not an easy word to translate into English, but to be involved with or to engage with is something like what that means. And so we want to read critically. We want to read in a questioning way. We're going to probably want to hold to certain fundamental assumptions, not challenge things like, what the Torah is. But it's a document that we have permission to question and challenge and try to explain what it says. And there is a fairly well-known Torah commentary called Achim. I think it's from the Middle Ages. And this is a comment that some of you will have seen before, and I won't read the whole thing. But the essence of this midrash is, or this commentary, is that there are multiple levels of meaning in every letter of the Torah, that there are different combinations of meaning. And so even if somebody else has already looked at a verse and says, this is what it means, that is not definitive. There are other meanings that are there as well. Sometimes those meanings could contradict one another. And that would still be okay, because the Torah is a document that can be interpreted in that way, with an exception, which is the exception of the halakha. There is a way to do the Torah. There are the ways we do the mitzvot. And though there is not multiple ways to do the mitzvot, even that's not quite true, but one is not permitted to get up and say, hey, this is what I think the Torah means about how you should keep kosher. The rules are for keeping kosher, and you should consult with suitable rabbinic authority. That would be Rabbi Spitzer. If you want to teach the halakha, this is the way we do it. Outside the realm of halakha, there are many different interpretations. They can all be true at the same time, even if they appear to contradict one another. That's totally fine. Part of a good Devar Torah, or at least one way to give a good Devar Torah, is to try to explain one of those meanings, wherever you may get it from in the long Jewish tradition of interpreting Torah, either to highlight something that's in the text, or to expand on something that's in the text, or to answer a question that people may have about the text. Drawing on this interpretive tradition and with this idea of many levels of meaning that relate to and build on one another is a place to build a Devar Torah if you are looking for a source to use. You have permission to do that. All right. So what is this thing that we're going to call, in Hebrew, we'll call it Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah that came out of the mouth. Literally, it means, we translate it as oral law. The tradition holds that when you get a Torah, when you get Moses comes down from the mountain with tablets, if I can use the visual image, which you take this literally or not take it literally, depending on where you stand on that spectrum. But in any event, there is this document called the Torah that is written on a scroll and composed of certain letters, and that has some kind of moral or ethical or performative authority for us in some way. What does that document mean? And the answer is that in order to understand a document, you must also have some tradition about what it means. Now, you could try to write that tradition down in a second document, and Jews have done that many times over the years, but now you have another document which has to be read and interpreted, and you will need someone to explain to you what that document means. And you can write this down as many times as you want, but ultimately to really understand the meaning of the document, you will need to be told or taught or given a tradition of how to read that document that will ultimately have to come from a teacher, from a person who can teach it to you face to face or camera to camera in the world we live in today. But we'll go back to doing it face to face as soon as we can. So we have this, again, this is the traditional explanation. You can take it as literally as you want or not as literally as you want, that when Moses comes down from the mountain, he's brought the Torah down with him, the written one. He's also brought down an oral Torah, which is a guide to understanding and interpreting it. And that oral Torah has, as I've said, been written down over time. And so now we have pieces of this oral tradition in further documents. And so the oral Torah is not really oral anymore. Much of it is written. And furthermore, the written Torah was pretty clearly taught from mouth to mouth until it was written down some time after it was given. So the distinction between written and oral is a little bit artificial, but those are the terms we use. And that's what we're going to try to draw on for understanding what the Torah may mean, or at least it's going to be one of the rich bodies of literature that's going to be available to us as we think about what the Torah means for us. That content of the oral Torah is going to be divided into different books of different ages by different authors, which have different purposes, but all of that content can also be given a functional category, a division. And the one I want to emphasize at the moment is that there's a division of all of this content into the halakha and the Agudat. The halakha is literally the path we go on, are rules about how to do mitzvot. So what does it mean to say you keep kosher? Well, it means the pig is no, the cow is yes. That's halakha. And the rest of the content, the Agudat, literally translate that as stories, but it really could be anything else in there that casts some illumination on the Torah, the tradition, what it means. So in many cases, it's stories about sages and how sages behaved. Because if we understand how sages chose their actions motivated by the Torah, we can understand how they saw or perceived or understood the Torah by seeing what they did in the stories we see them, that we have about them. There's many other types of Agudic material there as well. It means anything which is a discussion about the Torah, which is not the rules of how to perform the mitzvot of the Torah. And we'll see that division in quite a few things as we go along, and you'll see that distinction as if you prepare Divrei Torah as well. Questions up to there? All right. So let me give you an example of halakha, and we'll talk a little bit about where an oral law might contribute. So this is a verse from Shema. If you were at Minyan, you just said this about 15 minutes ago. Uchtav tam al mezuzot beitecha uvi sharecha. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now, you've already got the answer there, so this one comes a big surprise, but that's a commandment. There's a halakha, there's a way to do this thing, to inscribe the Torah on your doorposts of your house. And of course, there's mezuzah. Now, here I'll throw things open. I see enough people are unmuted that we'll be able to have a little conversation. So we have this mitzvah called mezuzah. And what do we do when we try to do this inscribing on the doorpost of our house? Somebody who's dealt with mezuzahs a little bit, tell me something we do when we try to put up a mezuzah. How do we do it?
Say a prayer.
There's a bracha that we make for doing it. Sure, that's definitely one of the rules of making a mezuzah. What else?
It goes on an angle facing, help me out, facing out.
Yeah, I think so.
It's to the right.
To the right. Okay. And that actually turns out to be a compromise view between one authority that said it should be put vertically and another one that said it should be put horizontally. In order to kind of accommodate both views, they tipped at the angle. So that's a rule for mezuzah. What's inside the mezuzah?
Verse from the Torah.
Shema.
Yeah, there's some text from the Torah in there. Yeah, the Shema is part of it. Is it the same in all of them? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't just put any words. There's a tradition about which ones you put on. Okay. Anyway, there are many, many more rules than that. Where did those come from? They're not in the Torah.
Did it come from rabbinic law, a biblical law, rabbinic law?
It comes from the oral Torah. meaning that some of these things, again, it depends on which one you're looking at, may have come all the way down from Moses at Sinai. Some of the things may have been rabbinic innovations at different paces of the history. But at some point in the history of people looking at this verse and saying, hey, we're supposed to inscribe Torah on the doors of our house, that a tradition evolved about how that was to be done. And that part of the tradition is halakha. But if you were doing your Divar Torah on the portion that contains, I think it's Ve'achanan, that has the Shema and has that verse, you might say, one thing I can do in my Divar Torah is I can teach people a little bit about the laws of Mezuzah, since we have that commandment here in our portion, and why we do things the way they do. And again, this debate between vertical and horizontal would be something that people would be interested in being taught. All kinds of ways you can do Divrei Torah that deal with halakha. What do we do because the Torah tells us to do it, and exactly how do we understand what our obligation is? Second category we might want to think about a little bit is Agudat. There's a story. So again, I'll kind of give you a distilled version of the story while you can read the full text. This is from the Talmud. This is from Tractate Shabbat, page 31a. We'll talk a little bit more about what the Talmud is and how it's structured as we go along. But this is from the Babylonian Talmud, which is what BT stands for. And this is not a rule about how to do things. This is an Agudat, but it's going to tell us something about Torah. So in this case, the stage is to tell us a story. There are quite a few stories in this section of the Tractate Shabbat that deal with somebody coming up to Shammai and Hillel, two rabbis. Hillel, everybody knows about. Shammai, some people know as the debating partner, the study partner of Hillel. And they didn't always have the same answers to questions. So there's a school that follows Hillel and a school that follows Shammai. Anyway, so one of these, a non-Jew comes up to Shammai and says, how many Torahs have you got? And Shammai gives this the union card answer. We have an written Torah, which is the thing in the scroll. And then we have this tradition about how to interpret it. And the guy says, you know, I don't believe you about the oral Torah. I can't see that. All I see is your scroll. So I want you to teach me the scroll, but I don't want to hear about this oral Torah. Now, this was probably at this time, maybe a little before, but there was a group of people that indeed rejected the oral law. Later, they became Karaites. I'm not sure if it's appropriate to use that term for this group, but probably not. This is probably the Tzaddukim who are being implicitly criticized here. But in any event, Shammai gets this person, says, go away. If you don't accept the oral law, then I'm not going to teach you anything. Shammai was harsh. Same guy goes to Hillel and asks the same question and says, okay, fine, I'll convert you and I'll teach you the written Torah. And he's got to teach him the alphabet. This guy doesn't speak Hebrew, so he says, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. The guy learns the alphabet. Next day he comes back. Hillel shows him the letters in the other order. So what was a Tav, he calls an Aleph. What was a Shin, he calls a Bet. And the guy said, wait. You told me the other thing yesterday. And Hillel says, oh, you're going to rely on my teaching. If you trust me to teach you what the letters are, then you'd really better also trust me to teach you what the document means. That you have to encounter that, you have to make that leap of faith, or the document is not useful to you. So this is an Agudat, which doesn't tell us what the law is, but nonetheless makes a very strong statement about the Torah in the sense that an interpretation and explanation, a teacher are central to having it, and being taught what's in that tradition is central. And hence we give Divrei Torah. We teach each other about the Torah. That's an Agudat. And all of the material in all of the Jewish rabbinic tradition can be roughly classified as either halakha or Agudat. All right. So what are the various sources we might look at? Now, those of you who read Rabbi Spitzer's father, Jeff Spitzer, his Back to the Basic class last Thursday, he put up a much more elaborate version of this document, and I would strongly encourage you to go look at that document because it was great. It was a beautiful picture, and he's a much better artist than I am too. It's marvelous, but it was more complex than we need for our purposes tonight. So I'm going to say that once you have a written Torah, and this flow chart here starts at the top with the written Torah, that the Jewish tradition deals with that document in basically three ways. The simplest one is simply to translate it and produce documents which are called Targum, the Aramaic word for translation. Another way is to ask about how to apply it. What is this telling us to do? And another way is to work on expanding its meaning. What is this story telling us if we start to read between the words? And if we go down the avenue of application, we come to a document called Mishnah, which is a series of statements about how the Torah, I'm simplifying more than a little bit here, but how the Torah is to be applied and interpreted and understood, and a commentary on it called the Gemara. These two together make up the Talmud. If we think about expansion, about reading more things into the story, we come to the body of works called Midrash, and ultimately to the body called Kabbalah. And all of these documents in the middle start to appear into the Second Temple era. Probably some of them are circulating orally earlier than that, but they're getting written down shortly after the Second Temple era. A lot of these things start to get written down. And that process continues until 800 or 1000 CE, depending on exactly which set of documents you're looking at. And all this stuff then feeds into the next level, which is trying to make sense of all this application and translation and expansion we've been doing. And here I'm going to divide into rulings and commentary, which is not quite the same distinction as halakha and Agudat, because much of the commentary deals with halakha and much of the ruling draws on ideas from Agudat. But we get to, so by 1000 CE, people have stopped doing the Talmud, well, I haven't fully stopped doing Midrash, but there's a settled core of Midrash by that time. And now people are starting to ask how we can compile all of this knowledge together and organize it into rulings and commentary. So that, in a brief flow chart, is how we move from the written Torah through different strata, different layers of interpretation of Torah, which are all in conversation with one another in some way. And let me pause here for questions. I'll say one more thing first. What I'm going to do for the next few slides is talk a little bit about each of these things and show you some examples of what they have.
And like the last time, you're going to give us this in print.
Yep, we'll give you the slides and the handout. If anybody didn't get the slides or the handout from the first class, email me afterwards and I'll make sure those get out to you. But I think I was able to find email addresses for everybody who was here last time. All right. Okay. So applications where the Talmud comes in. The first level is called the Mishnah. The Mishnah is written down before probably 180 to 200 CE.
Steve, I'm sorry. Were you taking questions?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
At that point, I'm
At
sorry.
all times. I'll even go back.
No, I was just wondering, are the traditions on how to do this, do they vary between the different sects of Judaism?
They do. Let me say a little bit about that. So the divisions of Judaism that we have now, Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstructionist, Renewal, these types of things, those divisions are only a few hundred years old. And all of these documents are compiled before then. So among the modern sects, whatever the right word is for movements, I guess, the sources are the same. The question is the level of authority they have. In Orthodoxy, they have a very high level of authority, particularly in halakhic practice. In conservative Judaism, they have some high level of authority, but not quite as much as the Orthodox do give them. In the Reform Judaism, the oral tradition is not as authoritative. And one is more free to disagree with things that one might see in the Mishnah or the Gemara, or even in the Torah itself, if one is willing to read a different interpretation. If you go back farther into the period where these documents were written, then you do see some differentiation. So one thing we'll get to on the next slide, the Gemara, the level of commentary on the Mishnah, there is a discussion and commentary in the Mishnah that was done in Israel, which we call the Jerusalem Talmud. And there was a somewhat longer and more extensive discussion of the contents of the Mishnah, which we call the Babylonian Talmud, that was done in what is now Iraq. And so there you have two different geographic traditions, each of which acknowledged the authority of the other, though they weren't competing with one another in that sense. There is a general sense that where the two of them conflict, ironically, it's the Babylonian one that is more authoritative, not because the Babylonian sages were wiser, but because life in Israel in that period was full of turmoil. It was difficult to organize and to study. And in Babylonia, the Jews were on a much better terms with the rulers. And so the Babylonian Talmud was simply, the discussions were more extensive, more disputes were resolved, the editing of the conversation was better. And then there are all kinds of debates over, particularly in Kabbalah, of the extent to which some rabbis believe that Kabbalah is a very authoritative source and other rabbis that want very little to do with it. So there you're going to have some of those kinds of discussions as well. Did that somewhat answer the question? Okay. All right, so anyway, one way to think about asking what does the Torah mean is to say, how do we apply this? How do we go about if we decide that we want to try to live our lives in the way that the Torah seems to be asking us to live our lives? How do we do that? I'm not going to try to answer that question, but I want to talk a little bit about the sources where one goes to look for those answers. So as I say, the first one is the Mishnah. It's written down in Israel between 180 and 200 CE by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who's just known as Rebbe, because the very central figure who did this. And here's an example of something you might find in the Mishnah. This is from a chapter of the Mishnah called Sukkot, a tractate called Sukkot, the rules for celebrating the holiday of Sukkot. Chapter 2, verse 6. This is only part of it. I didn't bring the whole thing. Rabbi Eliezer says, you are obligated to eat 14 meals in the Sukkah, one in the morning, one at night. Remember, they're in Israel, so for them, the Sukkot is a 7-day holiday, so 7 breakfasts and 7 dinners will make 14 meals. But the sages say the matter does not have a set amount. There's no number of meals you have to eat in the Sukkah, except the first night of the festival. You have to have the festival meal, and you have to have the festival meal in your Sukkah. But after that, much as you can do, as little as you're able to do, there's no fixed amount that you have to do. Quick note, they didn't agree about that. There were clearly different opinions, different understandings of the Torah, and there was some debate between them over which interpretation was more appropriate. There are subsequent rules for how these debates are resolved. There's a pretty good general rule that when a single rabbi is arguing against the sages, usually we follow the sages, but not always. So those are the kinds of things you'll find in Mishnah. Discussions over the sages of into the Second Temple era and a little bit later about how a mitzvah was to be carried out. And it's not all that, it has other things too, but that's the central purpose of the Mishnah. The Gemara is discussion and application of the Mishnah, often taking a Mishnah and looking at other sources from the same time period as the Mishnah that speak to it, either more complete recordings of the discussions that are in the Mishnah or comparing practices from different places and telling lots and lots and lots of Agudat, stories about how the sages of the Mishnah were doing things. And that gets written down around 350 in the Jerusalem Talmud, and it gets written down around 500 CE in the Babylonian Talmud. And then those kinds of become the foundational text, particularly the Babylonian Talmud, of the life of yeshiva students, that they spend a lot of their time looking at the Babylonian Talmud in particular. All right. The story that we had here, this Agudat comes out of that. This is where that comes from the Babylonian Talmud. All right. Questions up to there. Another way we can think about understanding and interpreting the Torah is by asking, how do we expand? How do we tell more of the story than is here at the surface level? And we have a tradition, some of you will know this, that there are 4 levels at which we can read the Torah. Peshat, the literal level. Remez, which means allegories. We're going to say that this story here in the Torah is really an allegory for something more complicated. So, for example, a fairly well-known one is that the journey from Egypt to the Promised Land, the story of the Exodus, is really a story about coming into contact with God and learning about God. And when we're enslaved, it really means we don't understand God. We don't know anything about the way the world works because we haven't received divine knowledge yet. And as we emerge into freedom, what we're really coming into is contact with the ideas and forces that motivate the universe. Anyway, Remez, allegorical interpretation of the story. Midrash is reading in for details that the story has left out. And I'll have an example of that in a moment, but places where the Torah doesn't seem to be giving us all of the story of what happened, and we want to try to read in and understand more about what's going on in the story than is there. Level 4, Sod, mysticism. Gematria comes in there. Lots of things come in there. Kabbalah is going to spring from that level. The 4 levels are known by their acronym. Pei, Resh, Dalet, Sa. I think it's a tov. Pardes, which also happens to be the Persian word for paradise. So that's a nice thing that people pick up from that. Midrash starts getting written down about the same time the Mishnah gets written down, a little after the destruction of the Second Temple. Midrash is still being compiled as late as 1200 CE. Oh, Alexander corrects me. It's a samech for sod, not a tov. Anyway, thank you, Alexander. I want to get that right. The process of compiling Midrashim therefore goes much longer than the Babylonian Talmud goes. That's continuing on for a while. The process of compiling Midrash, there is still a modern movement of asking questions of Torah that have not been asked of it before and trying to read in details. This has been particularly interesting for people in the feminist tradition who are rightfully concerned that the Torah has very little to say about the women and are looking for the stories of the women. Some of which are there, but not very many. More of them are found. The Talmud does do some interpretation of stories about the women in the Torah, but not much. So in that sense, Midrash is an ongoing process. There are always new questions that can be asked about what's more to the story than the Torah is giving us. That said, if you say the Midrash, at least in traditional circles, it will usually be taken as a reference to one of a number of collections of Midrashim that were compiled not much later than about 1000 or 1200 current era. Mystical works are also starting to appear towards the end of that era. The Sefer Bahir and the Sefer Yetzirah probably date from 5, 6, 7, 800, but the foundational work of Kabbalah, the Zohar, appears in the late 1200s. And so that's one place that this tradition develops as well. When we do Divrei Torah, we often work with Peshat, the literal level of what the text is saying. What are these words? And often we work at the Drash level. It's possible to work with Remez and with Sod, with mysticism, but they're less common than working with either Peshat or Midrash. And yeah, Bob.
Is the Merkavah tradition that's very old, goes back further. Are there text and interpretations of that, or that those issues?
So probably the thing to mention here is the story of the four who attempted to enter Pardes. That's in the Babylonian Talmud.
Okay.
So that goes back at least as far as 400 or 500, and probably farther than that. That's probably being based on older stories. The question of whether there is a continuous connection between the Talmudic era, particularly Gnosticism, and what then shows up in Spain in the 1200s is really difficult, and I don't know much about it. No, it's clear that the Kabbalah is drawing on earlier sources. I think it's also fair to say that the people who were writing Kabbalah in Spain in the 1200s were attributing things they wrote to an earlier era to lend authority to them. And so that's where some of these things are hard to answer. Because we're not entirely sure what those connections are.
Okay. But there's no one particular source or book that.
No, the Zohar is usually where you kick off.
Right, but that's later.
Then that is later. So there, and again, you probably know more. I think you know more about this than I do. But yeah, Sefer Yetzirah and Sefer Bahir are clearly somewhere in that gap.
Yeah.
In the Mishnah and the Talmudic era and the Zohar.
They're
the Zohar was clearly an oral tradition for at least a while before it was written down, and much is lost to us because it was not written at that time.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's the right branch of my graph is the tradition of expanding on the text of the Torah in those ways, in those those levels of expansion. I'll say just a little bit about translation because it is good stuff. No, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you the example of Midrash first. So this is from a collection of Midrash called Breshit Rabbah. Rabbah is from the Hebrew word to expand or to make bigger, or it's not Gadol, it's Rov, but expand is probably good enough. And it's a comment on a verse in Genesis 21:9. And the verse in question is, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, who she had born to Abraham, making sport. And one question you might have about this is, okay, what is making sport? What does that mean? But if you know the story, it's clear that Sarah is really angry about what Ishmael is doing. And there's a question that we might ask, what is Sarah so ticked off about? What is Ishmael doing that is so awful that he has to be driven out into the desert? So the Midrash comes and brings some answers to that, both to the language question and to the kind of the character question, the motivation of Sarah. Making sport refers to immorality. So there's a proof text from elsewhere in Genesis. This is actually in this week's Torah portion. This is Potiphar's wife's complaint after Joseph refuses to consort with her. He says, he came in here to make sport of me. So that implies that what Ishmael was doing was some form of sexual immorality. Ishmael was ravishing maidens and seducing. Yeah, that's why Sarah was annoyed. Rabbi Ishmael has another level of meaning. He says making sport is idolatry.
Yeah.
That he was sacrificing locusts on altars, and Sarah didn't want the descendants who were going to become the Jewish people to be caught up in that. So Ishmael had to go because of his flirtations with idolatry that were not acceptable to her. Rabbi Eliezer says, I'm sorry, it's not supposed to be idolatry, it's supposed to be violence. I miscopied that. Let the young men, I pray thee, arise and sport before us. And so that goes into a story that's somewhat well known, that Ishmael was actually shooting arrows at Isaac and missing him on purpose, but very close. That Ishmael was entranced with bloodshed, and that was not acceptable. So that's the way in which the Midrash uses this kind of linguistic ambiguity to try to delve into the story and say, what was Sarah thinking? And if you had to give a Devar Torah on that question, this Midrash would be very helpful to you in trying to tell people, what was Sarah concerned about? What was her motivation that made her feel that essentially banishing Hagar and Ishmael was the only solution? So Midrash is good for that kind of stuff.
And you'd fit that in the micro, in the your categories from last time, or the Jewish Learning Center's categories, into the microscopic when you look at that linguistic.
Yeah. Or you could probably classify this one as character. If you want to motivate it, if you wanted to motivate this about what does this word mean, then it's a microscope. Yeah. If you want to motivate it as why was Sarah so angry, then it's a character. And these things are fluid. They're not tightly characterized. Some elements, some Devar Torah can draw on elements of both. Again, note that these are three different answers to the question. It's not that one's right and the others are wrong. It's just these are three different answers to the question that exist in our tradition. Maybe they're all right. All right. I'm not going to say as much about translations, a little bit more technical, but it's certainly when you have a question, what does this word mean? Why is, if you're working at the Peshat level, why does the Torah say this? Understanding how that word has been translated over the years is an interesting question. And sometimes just reading different translations of a verse can tell you some things about how different people are reading different meanings into it by the way they choose to translate it. So a little history of that. The first language that the Bible was translated, the Torah was translated into, were Greek and Aramaic. I've written Aramaic here first, but I think the Greek translation was done earlier. The Greek translation is what we know as the Septuagint, which you may have heard of. The Aramaic one is known as Targum Onkelos, which you probably have not heard of unless you spent time in Orthodox circles, in which case you probably have, because Orthodox Chumashim usually have it. It gets translated into other languages as soon as Jews who speak that language want to read the Torah in that language. It was not, Torah was not translated into English in England very early, as far as I can tell, because the King James translation that was done by the English Church is actually a fairly good translation in terms of accuracy and being tolerably faithful to what the Hebrew is saying if you strip the Christian ideology away from it, which in the first 5 books you don't have to do very much. It was translated in the United States in 1845 by Isaac Leeser. People are still translating this thing very frequently. In 2007, when I put this list together, these were 3 translations and some commentary that we purchased for the class. So they're all in the Synagogue Library. If you want to see how the word has been translated, you can go to the library. You should get Josh's permission to be in there and not have your friends in there with you, but and just look and see how they all translated. What are the different translations that are available? If you understand the original Hebrew, then you get more of a sense of what the translation problems are as well. But again, some people have that skill and some won't. But we have enough different English translations to work with that understanding the different ways a verse is translated can be pretty interesting. All of those things come together by about 1000 CE. We have all of this halachic and agadic material in the Talmud and all this midrash. People are doing all these different things, and people start saying, "How are we going to How are we going to? If I want to know something about a verse, what am I going to do? If I want to do something about a mitzvah, how do I find all the relevant stuff?" So about 1000 or a little bit after that CE, people stop generating so much new material, and they start writing things whose purpose is to draw together and make coherent the stuff that's been produced in the previous 1000 or 1200 years. And again, I'm simplifying dramatically, but that's a part of it anyway. One thing that starts to appear at this time are legal codes. So if you want to know what the halakha is and you want to know what the halakha about mezuzah is, then you go to one of these books and you look up mezuzah and you get the laws there. There's quite a few of those. The two we should probably mention first are the Mishnah Torah, because it was done by Maimonides about 1200, give or take a little bit. And the Shulchan Aruch, which was done in the 1500s by Yosef Karo in Sfat in Israel. Maimonides in some ways is clearly the more knowledgeable rabbinic authority, but Maimonides told you what he thought, and people disagreed with him sometimes. So the Mishnah Torah is not the traditionally authoritative source. If Maimonides says this is what the law is, he might be right, but he might not be. And it's the Shulchan Aruch, which was more interested in compromise positions or explaining the range of opinion, not really explaining because they're still giving the answers, but was trying to draw on a consensus view. And in particular, the Shulchan Aruch got a commentary written a little bit later so that it explained both Ashkenazic and Sephardic practices, Sephardic in the main text and Ashkenazic in the commentary. And for that reason, the Shulchan Aruch was the one that is essentially the basis for Orthodox practice as essentially the ultimate authority. And in the conservative movement, it is at least the source text that we have to depart from. If you don't want to do something the way the Shulchan Aruch says to do it, you have to have a reason and you have to have rabbinic sanction for changing it. And that has to come from the, I guess, ultimately from the Committee on Law and Standards, although for our practices, it would be Rabbi Spitzer. So those kinds of things are getting written the first half of the second millennium. And the other things that are happening are Torah commentaries. And these are commentaries that are getting written in the sense of you read the Torah, and at the top half is the Torah text itself, and at the bottom half is somebody's comments on what it means. There are many. Some of these names will be familiar to you, some will not. I will just quickly name check a few. Rashi is the most famous one. Rashi's commentary deals explicitly with the Peshat level only. Rashi's purpose in his commentary is to explain to you the words on the Torah scroll. And he doesn't go further than that. So the importance of his commentary is if you want to know what the scroll is saying, Rashi will tell you. Nachmanides, also called Ramban, not to be confused with Rambam, which is Maimonides. His Torah commentary goes beyond the Peshat. In particular, he has a habit of writing things about mysticism and Kabbalah for people who already know them. And so he has a very famous phrase, Hamevin Yavin. Those who are wise will understand this. So he's giving you hints where the Kabbalah hooks in, but he's not explaining it to you because there's a tradition not to do that. You have to figure it out for yourself. Other names you may know, Gersonides, Ibn Ezra, Rashbam, those are all people from the Middle Ages who wrote important Torah commentaries. There are still modern commentaries. Probably the best one is the work that was done by Nahama Leibowitz in Israel in the 70s and 80s, I think. Her comments on the portion, which draw on the earlier commentaries, are pretty widely available and are very good and very interesting. And I think our Synagogue Library has a copy of Nahama Leibowitz. You can also get scholarship commentary. The people who are in my business of being professors who do religious studies have their comments on what they think the Torah means. The Jewish Publication Society did an important one in the 1980s, a thing called the Anchor Bible, which is done by religious studies professors. There are more of those as well. The sources I mentioned as earlier translations, Fox and so forth, often have commentary in addition to the translations that they're doing. If you have a Chumash, you will have some commentary. If you pick up our red Eitz Chaim, I don't have one here I can wave in front of you, but if you pick one up, the bottom of the page has commentary. When you are giving your Devar Torah, it is important to remember, again, as I said at the last class, the audience has the Eitz Chaim in front of them. They will not be shocked by the comments in Eitz Chaim because they may have read them while the Torah was being read. So if you want to build a Devar Torah off a commentary, you should bear in mind that the ones that are in the Eitz Chaim, the audience may have already seen. You still use them, but you don't need to explain that, those are already in front of your audience. And it can be very interesting to get Chumashim from other movements. So the stone, I know at the Men's Club Torah Study Group, a couple of people like to bring the stone Chumash and look at the commentary that's in that Chumash, because it's very different sometimes from what's in our movement or what the Reform Chumashim have. And seeing different modern commentaries can also, and this also gets to, I think it was Bob that asked earlier about, no, it was Andy, about how different movements read things differently. If you want to know how does this verse look to the Orthodox, the Conservative, the Reform, the movements Chumashim are the place to look.
Is one that uses the Reform translation, the Plow text, but has women's commentary or from a female perspective, and they have a lot of beautiful stuff in there, including some poems and other things that are for each of the partial.
And which is the one, Steve, that, or there's probably more than one, that actually uses the Hebrew for Rashi, side by side with the Torah in columns?
Stone has that.
Yeah.
The stone? Does the stone do that?
Yeah. Most Orthodox Chumashim will have Rashi's commentary in them as well as the Targum Onkelos.
But this is actually next to the text and it's in a separate column all the way through.
They don't have it translated though. They just have it in the text itself.
Oh, you can get a Chumashim that translated in English too.
Yeah.
Our synagogue library also has a Rashi, Hebrew of the Torah text, Rashi's commentary in Hebrew, and then on the facing page, English of both.
Right.
And that's a pretty cool source to look at. All right. One thing I didn't put on this slide, but I'll mention briefly, is that the Jewish philosophy gets moving around 1100. Maimonides is very important in early Jewish philosophy, and that's another thing that comes out of this time period. I didn't put that here because if you are not already somewhat knowledgeable about Jewish philosophy, it's a hard place for a beginner to dive in and get a Devar Torah. But if you do have a background in philosophy and you want to bring that to your Divrei Torah, some of the philosophical works that were written around that time are also really helpful and very interesting. All right, now that's a long range of sources that are talking about the Torah that can help you find something that you can build a Devar Torah around. Where do you get it? I'm going to give you 3 answers, 2 of them quickly and 1 of them not so quickly. The first one is we have a synagogue library. One of the reasons we have a synagogue library is a lot of this stuff is in there. We have a lot of commentaries in there. We have a lot of translations in there. We have an English only complete Talmud in there. It's not the world's greatest translation, but we have it. We have, I think, some Hebrew Mishnah and commentary. There's a lot of things in our synagogue library that are wonderful to go look at. And if you want specifics, I'm happy to talk after the class. But that's a nice resource that isn't used much in our community. And one of the things that could be done with it is congregants could go in and gather material for Divrei Torah from there, because there's some really nice stuff there. Second thing, Jewish bookstores. Most of these books are in, for the more obscure ones, not so much. But if you want to buy a Rashi, you can do that. You can get that. If you want to buy a copy of the Guide of the Perplexed by Maimonides, you can do that. If you think that learning Torah is something that interests you and something you might want to do frequently, it's not a bad idea to acquire copies of some of these texts so that you can have them for home reference, either because you might be doing Divrei Torah more than once if you feel like you want to get into it, or just because you have a regular practice of learning Torah, that you're going to read the weekly portion and want to be able to learn something about it beyond the text as you read it. Having a library of things you can go to is very useful. The Schmidt household has pretty big libraries, you can imagine, being an academic household, but we have a Rashi and we have Nahama Leibowitz and we have a couple of other, I have a Chabad Chumash, which has a Chabad commentary on the Torah that was written by the various Lubavitcher Rebbes and other folks too, but mostly Lubavitcher Rebbes, the sequence of them. And there are things that can complement your regular study of the Torah portion if you do that. Anyway, but the thing I want to talk about tonight, and I'm going to spend the rest of the class on this, is Sefaria.org, a website whose ambition is to be the largest possible collection of Jewish rabbinic sources in existence. And they're doing very well, and quite a lot of it is in English. And the other really nice thing about Sefaria is that it's linked. If you know what verse you want, you can click here, and it will take you to all the places all through this tradition where that verse is referenced or discussed. And that's what makes it incredibly cool. And that's why everybody, at least all the rabbis, use it, because it's the connections that it makes are just 21st century computer powerful, and they're very, 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 very helpful. They let you put things together that 20 years ago you had to be a professional rabbi with a major library to be able to do. And now it's, thanks to the World Wide Web, it's all there at your fingertips. Okay, let me pause here again for questions, because that's the last slide. And so I'm going to get back into gallery mode so I can see everybody. If anybody has any questions at this point, I'd be thrilled to take them. Excellent. And then I'm going to share again, but this time I'm going to just put my whole screen up, and I'm going to go to, I thought I had a blank screen, but I don't. I'll go bring a new one. Okay. www.sefaria.org. So here we are at the Sefaria website. You'll notice, like all other free websites, they ask for donations. Don't have to, but if you find the site useful and if you'd like them to be able to continue to expand, I have sent them donations a couple of times and plan to do so again in the future. And it's a really amazing thing for a community. And my personal opinion, I have no vested interests. It's just my opinion is that it is an organization worth supporting. Anyway, they bring you to the Sefaria Library. And here at the Sefaria Library, we find many of these texts. Tanakh, which stands for Torah, Nevi'im, which is prophets, and Ketuvim, which is writing. The Tanakh is what we think of as the Bible, Old Testament in other people's terms. But we have the complete Mishnah. We have the complete Talmud. I think they have both Babylonian and Jerusalem in there. Certainly they have Babylonian. All the collections of Midrash that are there, collections of halakhic rulings. So the Mishnah Torah is in there. Kabbalistic connections, the liturgy, they have prayer books that you can look at. Some of the philosophy works are there. You can go more. Here things start to get a little bit more obscure, but I'll just quickly point out Hasidut, if you want to know what the Hasidim think. There's a section of that there. Musar, those who've done the Musar class, there are Musar texts in there, and so forth in that library. And then you can go further down if you want to know what the Talmud page of the week is, or if you want to read this week's portion, or you want to read the Haftorah, all those things are available. And more. Or what we can do is we can just go, I'm going to go to the text. I'm going to say, let's go to the Tanakh. Let's go to one of the books, and we're just going to kind of scroll through till we get something. And I'm going to go to Genesis chapter 39, because that's in this week's portion. And because the first example I want to show you is there. So let's say that you were going to do the Devar Torah this Saturday. Maybe the baby comes and Rabbi isn't there, and somebody has to zing up a Devar Torah on short notice. And you start reading the text, and you've reflected on it, and you should have done this a couple of weeks before, but maybe you don't get that much advance notice. And you get this verse. Hey, you know, I think this verse, I'm sorry, this is not where I want to be. I want to be in 37. Let me go back to 37. I misclicked on that. And here's this fairly well-known verse. Israel loved Joseph the best of all his sons. He was the child of his old age, and he had made him an ornamented tunic, the coat of many colors. In Hebrew, the katonet pasim. Then you've got the Hebrew and the English here. And you say, hey, you know, maybe that's something that caught my eye as I was preparing for my Devar Torah. I want to learn a little something about that. Click, boom. Under resources, we get lots and lots and lots of things where commentary, targum, translation, midrash, halakha, it's all here. Not much halakha, because this is not a verse that deals with a mitzvah. I'll bring up another one that does in a few minutes. And again, click on what you want. Let's look at some commentaries. And I have some notes on exactly things I do want to flip to. Okay, so here is Rashi's commentary on that verse. Oh, let me say one more thing. So under commentaries, we have 69 of these things, 2 from Rashi, 2 from Ibn Ezra, and you may be able to see that some of these things have a square box saying E in. That means at least some of what you'll get if you click there is in English. Others don't have that. If you look at Bardenura on Torah, it's got something there, but it's only available in Hebrew. So if your Hebrew skills are fantastic, go ahead and try that out. If you prefer to limit to English, Sefaria will tell you what's available to you in English. All right, so we'll go to Rashi. Here's Rashi's comment on this verse. So Rashi says, Bein Zakanim, the son of his old age. What does it mean by that? It says, well, he's called that because he was wise. We've learned in earlier portions that that Jacob spent a lot of time learning Torah from Shem and Eber. That's in previous portions. And apparently he taught that all to Joseph. Joseph was the yeshiva bachar of the family. And that is what made Jacob particularly favorable towards Joseph and got him this nice coat of many colors. A second explanation, Rashi's got a couple explanations for you. They look the same. Joseph looked a lot like Jacob, and Jacob thought that was important and really liked the guy that looked like him. And so that made him a favored child. Rashi also has a tote on katonet pasim, a term for raiment of fine wool, and we get some kind of details about what a katonet pasim might be. A midrashic statement about that, so you can see that these links are here, and there's a link to Genesis Rabbah. If we clicked on that, it would take us all the way over to Bereshit Rabbah. I'm not going to do that right now. I want to go back from there. But it's like all good hyperlink sources, click, 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 it'll take you somewhere. The problem is to kind of keep yourself track of where you've been and how you got there and how to get back. Anyway, that's Rashi's comment. Note that Rashi is mostly explaining terms. When it says Bein Zakanim, son of his old age, what does that mean? Oh, it means that he was the one who was studied. Katonet pasim, what is a katonet pasim? What exactly is that thing? Rashi's commentary works at the Peshat level. Here's somebody with a different take. I want to do Ramban, Nachmanides. So comment on the same verse. He was born to him in his old. What does it mean he was the son of his old age? Well, the literal meaning is he was born when he was in old age. Although there's a problem. Benjamin was born even later. If Joseph was the son of the old age, what is Benjamin? The son of the really old age? So it's got to be something a little more complicated than that. So here's Rashi's interpretation. Ramban writes after Rashi. I will also say quick, if you want to know who these guys are, it's easy to go to Wikipedia and look up Nachmanides. It'll tell you who he was and when he lived and these kinds of things. Often if you get a source, you don't know what it is, Wikipedia will quickly fill in. I'm presuming it's mostly the Orthodox world has made sure that Wikipedia is exceedingly well educated in Jewish tradition. There's a lot of good source there if you just want to know what things are. Ibn Ezra has a note that Nachmanides is commenting on other commentaries because these things are feeding back in on each other that way. So Ibn Ezra's answer is, yeah, Benjamin was also a child of his old age, but Ramban doesn't agree. He says, no, the point of this is he loved Joseph more than his others because he was a child of his own age. He didn't love Benjamin that way. Benjamin didn't get a coat. So what's the story? And the answer is that they pick one. Joseph served Jacob in a way that the other brothers didn't do this. And this also makes sense a little bit later in the story when Jacob sends Joseph to go see what his brothers are doing. Well, that's because Jacob was there, or Joseph was there. He wasn't out shepherding with the others. So you get some information, you get some stories from this. You can go down and do other commentaries that are here. Let's go down. Those are our older traditional ones, but if I go down far enough, I'll get to the JPS. This is a modern commentary. Again, see the EN, which means it's going to be in English when we click on it, unlike the Kitzur Ba'al HaTurim, which is not going to be in English, so we won't look at that one. JPS, this is a real simple commentary on this one. Coat of many colors, we don't really actually know that. So this is a little bit more about the linguistics. We don't know what the origin of that word is. So that's not very helpful, but at least it's there. It's something that's available to you. Notice also that Sefaria is keeping track of all the places I've clicked, so I can go back and look at them one by one. It's a handy feature that it does. It helps kind of give you a map of where you've been if you want to put pieces together later. That's commentary. Lots of different commentaries on this verse in different places that you can look at. It helps if you have something, and if you know something about the structure, see earlier part of this class, then you have some sense of who these folks are. But if you don't know who Sforno is, you can still go look and see what Sforno says. Va'aseh lo katonet pasim, made him a coat of many colors, a sign that Joseph was supposed to be the leader. This was really supposed to be favoritism all along. It's a promotion to get to wear this, just like other people get special clothing to indicate their high status. And if that resonates with you, then you go to Wikipedia and you look and you find out who Sforno was. He was an Italian rabbi of the 15th century, by the way. Anyway, that's commentary. But we can also go look at Midrash. Let's go look at some Midrash. I think that'd be fun. Here's some Midrash about this verse. I'm going to Bereshit Rabbah. Israel loved Yosef. The brightness of features was his, so that's a comment we've seen. All the halachot, all the Torah learning that Shem and Aver passed to Yaakov, he passed in. He made a ketonet pasim for him. Rabbi Reish Lakish says, this is going to cause problems. One should not treat one of his sons differently, because it was the ketonet pasim that made the brothers hate Jacob, which is a little different from the traditional text. The traditional text says it's the dreams. But this commentary says, no, there was more going on than there. The dreams wouldn't have been such a big deal if the parental favoritism hadn't been there already as well. That's something you can draw on. More stuff. Lots of interesting ways things are being read into this text. Let me go down. The next one I wanted to, okay. Many more midrashim, some in English, some not. Halakha, Kabbalah, philosophy, all kinds of good things. That's a verse which is mostly story. Let me take about 3 or 4 or 5 more minutes, and I'll do another verse where there's more kind of halakha about it. Let me pause for a question, though, before we change verses, if anybody's got a question.
Just a quick question. What was that? Yeah, he was a rabbi. Yeah. What is that one modern thing that says modern? And it says
the JPS, yeah, the Jewish Publication Society did a modern scholarly commentary on the entire Torah. I think in 1989.
Yeah, it's one volume for each of the books.
And it's in the Synagogue Library, but it's also available to you on Sefaria.
Okay.
All right. So let me go back to Tanakh. And let me go back to, this time I'm going to go to Deuteronomy, and I'm going to try to come full circle here by going to 6:9, which is inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And we want to know more about that. Let's click on it. Again, on the right side of the screen, a bunch of stuff will come up, a bunch of commentary will come up, a bunch of Targum will come up, translations of it, some Mishnah. There's more Mishnah and Talmud on this one because this one's a law. And so we're going to be able to go into Mishnah, and we're going to find Mishnah Sota. I'll click on that one. Alexander is cringing, but don't worry, it's okay. The following may be recited in any language, the section concerning the Sota, which is why this is in the Mishnah here, the confession made at the presentation time, and the Shema. You can say the Shema in any language according to Mishnah Sota. It doesn't mean that you actually can, because the subsequent authorities might not agree with this, but that's why this is here, is because of the if that chat was private to me, it's going to go to everybody, so hopefully not. Oh, it's the Yevamah. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, you know what we're doing. Anyway, and we can also go see what's in Mishnah Machot, and that says, regarding the 2 portions of scripture in the mezuzah, the absence of one invalidates the other. Even one missing letter means the whole mezuzah is invalid. That scroll's got to be perfect. In fact, there's a rabbinic tradition that you should, I think once every 7 years, you should inspect your mezuzah scrolls to make sure they are still complete and intact. And if they're not, you should either repair them or replace them. So that's there. But we can also go to commentary on this verse. Let's go to Ibn Ezra. I didn't look at this before, so I have no idea what this is going to be, but here it is. Ibn Ezra, you shall write them. The dissenters, and Ibn Ezra might be talking about the Karaites when he says dissenters. I'm not sure, but probably people who don't accept the oral law here. They claim that it's figurative. You don't really have to inscribe these on your doorpost. They're supposed to mean that it's supposed to be read figuratively. But he said, no, this is, now you probably also should, these laws should be important. These words of Torah should be important to you in many ways. But he says, no. If you have got the truth, you really are supposed to put these things on your door. That we have the Mishnah of Mezuzah in order to fulfill this verse in its literal way. One more thing I wanted to show you. Let's go to, because this is part of Shema, it has an entry for prayer. It had an entry for, I've probably gotten out of verse 9. Back to 9. Oh, that's right. I think it's under, where was this? Liturgy, probably. Darn, I didn't leave myself good enough notes on this. There was one I really wanted to show you. Now I don't know if I'm able to find it. Maybe it was here. Yep, here we go. We'll go to the guide for the Perplexed. So this is from Maimonides talking about the temple, and he said the key part of this is that we were not commanded to sacrifice in every place and every time, but to build a temple. We build a temple in one place. That's a mitzvah that we perform in only one place, only where the temple has been put. But their prayer and supplication can be offered everywhere and by every person. You can pray in any place, and similarly, you can put up a mezuzah. Any place you happen to dwell is an appropriate place for a mezuzah. Those are kinds of divine service that can be done by anybody in any location, as opposed to other types of service which are bound to a particular place or particular time. Let me take one more look and see if I can find this other thing I wanted to show you. If it doesn't come up fairly quickly. Oh, yep, here it is. Penina halacha, penine halacha. And I'll tell you, I don't know what this is other than that it had an English box, so I took a look at it, and there was something I liked about it. And this is about reading the Shema. We read the 3 paragraphs, the Shema Yisrael, which deals with the yoke of heaven. The second is Vayhi im Shema, and the third is Vayomer. And the Shema consists of these 3 paragraphs. One is about the foundation of our faith. The second paragraph is about the meaning of that foundation for our lives. And the third one is about how to pass and how to build that faith in ourselves and in others. There's a nice little thought about the Shema that's in there for you. Okay, we have spent about 15 minutes looking at Sefaria. We could spend decades, but it's just an amazing set of resources that is available that covers this huge span of Jewish religious literature, tradition, all of it, not all, everything we've looked at least, in some way connected to the idea of interpreting or understanding Torah. I'm going to quickly say there's this command here called add to sheet. You can use Sefaria to make sheets of different sources, which then you can pass around in a class. Doubtless you have seen rabbis in many places doing that. That's one of the things Sefaria is going to be really well known for, is when you see somebody with a list of 3 or 4 or 5 things that they've pulled out of the Talmud or the Midrash or somebody's comment, they probably got them all from Sefaria, and Sefaria put the sheet together for them, which is really handy. All right, let me see if I've gone past this chat. Oh, yeah, thank you. All right. So I recommend Sefaria to you as a tool when you are looking at a verse in Torah, either because you're planning to prepare a Dvar Torah, or you just are looking at a verse in Torah, you want to know something about it. Everything you could conceivably want to know about it is there in Sefaria for you. It is only a question of figuring out how to do the navigation to get to it. Take some practice, and also as you build your knowledge of what these sources are, as you learn more about what types of things Rashi says in his commentary, you'll say, oh, this is a question about the Peshat. I should go look at Rashi for this. Where you say, oh, this is a question about the Maimonides is going to have something to say about this. You know what's in the guide of the Perplexed. You get the hang of what that's about. You know what kind of things to look for there. But other than going to rabbinical school and studying years studying this, which is also a good thing to do, by the way, although not something that's feasible for most of us. But Sefaria makes it easy just to dive in and get your feet wet and hunt around and see what's in there. And when you do that, you will find something and you'll say, hey, that's cool. I never knew that. I never thought about it that way before. And then you will be able to come to synagogue on Saturday morning and give your Dvar Torah on that purse. And you'll be able to say, hey, let me share something with you from the Jewish tradition about what the Torah means that you might not know, that I think is really helpful, or I think is really interesting, or I think resolved a problem that I had with this text. And Sefaria is just really good for that. All right, I'm going to say just one more thing before I roll. 2 more things. The first one is I'll have questions at the end in just a moment. But the other one is to remind people that Rabbi Spitzer is very interested in promoting Torah study, Torah learning, Torah discussion among the congregation, as all conservative rabbis are, and is very open to the idea that congregants who would like to try this should be able to go up and do it. So if you have that interest, contact him. You can contact me too, but contact him and think about what's a good date and what's a good portion. If you really want the leprosy, we'll tell you what date that's available. The guy behind me has lots of spots. Maybe he's yeah, we'll give that portion to the cat there. And it will be something that we'd be very happy to see congregants doing. And part of the reason of including this material in Back to Basics was to try to give congregants the opportunity to develop that skill and then to demonstrate. All right, I'm done with what I want to present. I will happily take questions. We can discuss, we can shoot the breeze, whatever we want to do.
Thank you, Steve.
I had a further question about Sefaria in terms of putting together a sheet.
Yeah.
Right? Can those things that you save to the sheet be moved around easily, as in a word processor document?
I've only done it once.
Okay.
You should, if you really want to do sheets on Safari, you can create an account there, so you can save things and they'll be saved
Right.
for you. You can save your sheets there. The one time I did it, I found it pretty easy. I didn't
Okay.
do anything real hard. I was just trying to extract about half a page of Talmud out of it so I could go with a Hebrew and English translation that wasn't the
Yeah.
Art Scroll one, because the Art Scroll one is particularly orthodox. And I study from that regularly and I love that translation, but I know how to filter it. And I was presenting to an audience that might be confused about that. So I went there to get a more, Safaria is, first of all, they'll put up whatever translations you want, but they also do some translation themselves, and they try to be a little bit more denomination neutral about it.
So
which is
they,
not true of the Art Scroll folks at all.
you have to have an account with them then in
Yeah,
order
it's
to
easy
have
to sign up.
sheets.
Yeah,
You're right. Okay.
yeah. Just give them your emails and you create a password, and then you can log in and you can look at stuff you've seen before and you can create sheets and so forth.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it to say any more than that, unfortunately. Rabbi Spitzer, I'm sure, does, because I've seen him come with Safaria sheets, or certainly what looks like Safaria sheets. The other thing that's out there is if you make your sheets available to the public, you can find other people's Safaria sheets. So if you have to teach a class on Jacob, you can go find other sheets that other people have put together about Jacob. And so they,
Okay.
this notion of commentary feeding back in on itself continues in our generation, that you can go see what other people around you are talking about. You can decide if you agree with it or not. If you don't agree with it, you can make up your own source sheet that argues against their source sheet. And it's amazing
That's
what
excellent.
stuff that's out in the cloud. Yeah. Technology is being put together to let us do Jewish Torah commentary and discussion in a way that's never been possible before. It's really fascinating. All right. Then I will suggest that we wrap up.
Well, thanks for doing this.
Feel
Very
free to
good.
shoot me an
Very much.
email if further questions show up, or if I can offer anything. And I hope to see one or two or three or all six of you on the beam at some point, because it'd be very nice.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
night, everybody.
Thanks much, Lee.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Good night.
Appreciate it. Erev Tov.
Erev Tov.